Jake had been searching for a roommate for 3 months, and frankly, he was getting desperate. Living in the city was expensive. His freelance photography business wasn't bringing in enough to cover the full rent of his 2-bedroom apartment. He'd posted ads everywhere online, on bulletin boards at coffee shops, even asked friends to spread the word. But everyone who responded was either weird, unreliable, or couldn't afford their half of the rent. Then Zara contacted him. Her message was different from the others. It was formal, almost like a business letter. She wrote that she was new to the area, studying local customs and culture, and needed a quiet place to live while she completed her research. She promised to be clean, respectful, and could pay several months up front if needed. Jake thought it was a bit odd how she phrased things, but honestly, he was tired of dealing with people who couldn't even spell properly in their messages. When they met at a nearby cafe, Jake wasn't sure what to expect. Zara walked in exactly. On time, not a minute early or late. She was tall and pale, with an almost perfect posture that made her stand out in the casual coffee shop crowd. Her hair was platinum blonde, almost white, and she wore simple but expensive-looking clothes. What struck Jake most was how she moved carefully, like she was paying attention to every step. "You must be Jake," she said, extending her hand for a handshake. Her grip was firm but cold, and she held eye contact in a way that was intense, but not uncomfortable. "Thank you for meeting with me." They sat down, and Jake started his usual roommate interview questions. Where was she from? What did she do for work? Any bad habits he should know about? "I'm from a very remote area in Northern Europe," Zara answered. "Most people haven't heard of it. I'm here doing research on local social patterns and cultural behaviors. It's a type of anthropological study." When Jake asked for more details about her research, she gave answers that sounded academic, but were somehow vague at the same time. She mentioned studying human interaction patterns and daily ritual behaviors. Jake figured she was working on some kind of PhD thesis and didn't want to bore him with technical details. What impressed him most was when she pulled out an envelope full of cash. "I prefer to pay rent in advance," she explained. "It eliminates uncertainty for both parties." Inside was enough money for 3 months of rent, all in crisp. Perfectly sequential bills that looked like they'd just come from the bank. Jake had never met someone so formal and prepared. Most of his previous roommate candidates could barely scrape together a security deposit. Here was someone offering to pay months ahead with excellent references from previous landlords, and who spoke like she was conducting a business transaction. Rather than just looking for a place to crash, there were some odd things about her, though. When Jake mentioned his photography work, she asked very specific questions about his equipment and whether he did surveillance photography. He laughed and explained he mostly did weddings and family portraits. But she seemed unusually interested in the technical details of cameras and lighting equipment. She also asked strange questions about building security, neighborhood watch, programs, and whether there were any monitoring systems in the area. Jake assumed she was just being careful as a single woman moving to a new place. The weirdest moment came when his phone rang during their meeting. It was a normal ringtone, but Zara jumped slightly and looked around the cafe with what seemed like alarm. When she realized it was just his phone, she smiled apologetically and said she was sensitive to sudden electronic sounds. Despite these quirks, Jake felt good about her as a potential roommate. She was clearly responsible, financially stable, and seemed mature enough to respect boundaries. After his last roommate had left dirty dishes everywhere and brought random people over at all hours, Zara's formal approach was actually refreshing. They agreed she could move in the following weekend. The first month living with Zara was surprisingly peaceful. She kept her word about being clean and quiet. In fact, she was almost too clean. Jake never saw any mess from her ever. Her side of the bathroom always looked like it had just been cleaned, and she never left anything in the common areas. Her daily routine was like clockwork. She woke up at exactly 6:30 every morning, made tea in a precise ritual that took exactly 8 minutes, and then disappeared into her room for what she called morning documentation. Jake assumed she was writing in a journal or working on her research. She was fascinated by everything Jake did. When he made coffee, she watched intently and asked detailed questions about the process. Why did he use that particular ratio of coffee to water? What was the purpose of drinking a stimulant first thing in the morning? How did the caffeine affect his behavior throughout the day? At first, Jake thought she was just curious, but her questions were so specific and analytical that it seemed like she was studying him. When he mentioned this jokingly, she said her research required her to understand all aspects of daily life. In detail, Zara was also incredibly interested in his weekend activities. She'd ask what he planned to do, who he would see, and why he chose certain entertainment over others. When Jake binge-watched a TV series one Saturday, she sat nearby taking notes. She claimed she was studying leisure consumption patterns. For her research, the most endearing thing about living with Zara was how she reacted to normal things with such genuine curiosity. When Jake ordered pizza delivery, she was amazed by the entire process, how food could be prepared somewhere else and brought directly to your door. She asked the delivery guy so many questions about his route and delivery system that Jake had to tip extra to make up for the awkward interaction. Approached everything with the same scientific interest, from Jake's choice of music to his grocery shopping habits. It was like living with someone who had never experienced modern life before, but who was incredibly intelligent and eager to understand everything. Jake found himself looking forward to her questions and observations. She made him think about things he'd always taken for granted. Why did people keep photos of family members on their walls? What was the social significance of sharing meals? Her outsider perspective made his ordinary life seem more interesting. Little did Jake know that Zara's curiosity wasn't academic at all. She really was studying human behavior, but not for any university research project. She was part of something much more extraordinary. Gathering information about Earth and its inhabitants for purposes Jake couldn't even imagine. But for now, they were just two roommates sharing an apartment, with one of them asking slightly more questions than usual about everyday human life. Saturday morning started like any other weekend for Jake. He woke up around 9, made his usual strong coffee, and decided today was finally the day he'd set up his new photography studio. For months, expensive equipment had been sitting in boxers in the spare room, waiting for him to have enough free time to organize everything properly. Jake had been saving for over 2 years to build his dream photography setup. Every wedding he shot, every family portrait session, every corporate headshot, the money had gone straight into his equipment fund. Now he finally had everything he needed to take his freelance business to the next level. The spare room had great natural light from 2 large windows, making it perfect for a home studio. Jake started by clearing out all the random stuff that had accumulated their old furniture. Boxes of books, exercise equipment he never used. Once the room was empty, he began unpacking his new gear. First came the camera bodies, 2 professional models that had cost him more than his car was worth. Placed them carefully on the desk, still amazed that he actually owned such high-end equipment. Next were the lenses, each one specialized for different types of photography. The portrait lens, the wide angle for group shots, the macro for detail work, each one represented months of saving and planning, but the real excitement came with setting up the lighting equipment. Jake had researched every piece for months. Before buying, the main light stand went in the corner, tall and sturdy enough to hold his biggest softbox. The ring light, his most recent purchase, was perfect for portrait work. It created an even, flattering light that made everyone look their best. He spent an hour just arranging the wireless transmitters and receivers that would let him control all the lights remotely. These little devices were amazing. He could adjust brightness, change settings, and sync everything from his camera. No more running around manually adjusting lights between shots. The backdrop system went up next with rails that could hold different colored backgrounds. Jake had bought white, black, and gray backdrops to start with, but he was already planning to get more creative options later. Professional photographers made it look easy, but getting everything level and properly positioned took way longer than he expected. By the time he finished setting up the computer workstation, the room looked like a real professional studio. His new editing computer was a powerhouse, fast enough to handle the massive files from his high-resolution cameras. The monitor was calibrated for accurate colors, essential for editing photos that clients would print and display. Jake stepped back to admire his work. Tripods stood at different heights, reflectors leaned against the wall, and cables were neatly organized and labeled. The room looked professional, expensive, and most importantly, ready for business. He could already imagine the improved quality of photos he'd be able to create with all this equipment. That's when Zara walked in. She was carrying her usual morning tea, probably planning to ask about weekend plans or maybe invite herself to observe whatever human leisure activity he had planned. Jake had gotten used to her curiosity about his weekend routines, but the moment she stepped through the doorway, everything changed. The teacup started shaking in her hands. Little tremor, her whole hand was vibrating like she'd grabbed something electric. Her usually perfect posture crumpled as she took a step backward, her eyes scanning the room with what looked like genuine fear. Jake had never seen Zara show any strong emotion before. It was always calm, controlled, almost robotic in how steady. She kept herself. Now she looked like someone who'd just walked into their worst nightmare. "What is all this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her usual, precise way of speaking was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost panicked. Jake turned to look at his equipment, trying to see what might have upset her. Everything looked normal to him, just photography gear arranged in an organized workspace. Maybe she was worried about the cost. Some people got uncomfortable around expensive things. "It's my photography studio," he said, walking over to his favorite piece, the ring light. "Pretty cool, right? This light here creates the most amazing, even lighting for portraits. In these little boxes," he pointed to the wireless transmitters, "let me control everything remotely." But Zara wasn't listening to his explanation. She was staring at the ring light like it was some kind of weapon. Her face had gone even paler than usual, which Jake hadn't thought was possible. She was backing toward the door, never taking her eyes off the equipment. "Where did you get all of this?" she asked, and her accent was stronger than he'd ever heard. The carefully neutral way she usually spoke was replaced by something that sounded foreign, but not like any European accent Jake knew. "I saved up for it," Jake said, confused by her reaction. "Took me 2 years to afford everything. Some of this stuff is pretty specialized. You probably haven't seen equipment like this before." He walked over to one of the transmitters, picking it up to show her. "See, this sends signals to all the lights so I can adjust them without." "Don't touch that." Zara practically shouted, then immediately looked embarrassed by her outburst. "I mean, please be careful with that device." Jake stopped, holding the small transmitter in his palm. It was just a black box with a few buttons and an antenna. Nothing scary about it. But Zara was looking at it like he was holding a live snake. "Zara, it's just a wireless controller for the lights. Look, I'll show you how it works." He pressed a button, and one of the soft boxes lit up across the room. The reaction was immediate. Zara dropped her teacup, and it shattered on the hardwood floor. Tea splashed everywhere, but she didn't even seem to notice. She was pressed against the doorframe now, her eyes darting between the lit softbox and the transmitter in Jake's hand. "How long have you had this equipment?" she asked, her voice tight with something that might have been fear or anger. "Are you monitoring the building? The neighborhood? Monitoring?" Jake laughed, but it came out nervous because of how serious. She looked. "Zara, this is photography equipment. I take pictures of weddings and families. I'm not monitoring anything." But even as he said it, Jake could see that his explanation wasn't helping. If anything, Zara looked more suspicious. She was studying his face like she was trying to figure out if he was lying to her. "You're telling me this is all for taking?" "Pictures?" she asked, gesturing at the room full of equipment. "Oh yeah. Professional photography requires professional equipment. The lights, the cameras, the computer for editing, it's all standard stuff for someone in my business." Zara's eyes moved from piece to piece, and Jake could almost see her mind working, cataloging everything she saw. But instead of the usual curiosity she showed about his life, this felt different. This felt like she was gathering intelligence. The strange thing was, Jake found himself getting defensive. He'd worked so hard to afford all this equipment, and now his roommate was acting like he'd done something wrong just by setting up a photography studio in his own apartment. "Look, if you're worried about noise or anything, I'll make sure to let you know when I'm doing shoots," he offered. Zara didn't respond. She was still staring at his equipment with that mix of fear and suspicion. Finally, she bent down and started picking up pieces of the broken teacup, her hand still shaking slightly. "I should clean this up," she mumbled, not making eye contact. As she gathered the ceramic pieces, Jake noticed she kept glancing at his equipment. Not the casual observation he was used to from her, but something more intense, like she was memorizing every detail. Something had definitely changed between them in that moment, though Jake couldn't understand what or why. All he knew was that his roommate's reaction to his photography equipment was way beyond normal, and he had a feeling this conversation wasn't over. The week following the studio incident was the weirdest week Jake had ever experienced with a roommate. Zara, who had previously been curious about everything he did, now seemed to be actively avoiding him. Peek around corners before entering. Common areas, like she was checking to make sure he wasn't there with his camera. Every time Jake's camera flash went off during test shots in his studio, he'd hear a small gasp or the sound of footsteps quickly moving away from his door. It was like living with someone who was afraid of photography itself, which made no sense to Jake, who was afraid of cameras in the modern world. What really started to worry him were the questions Zara began asking. They weren't her usual curious observations about human behavior anymore. These questions felt different, suspicious and pointed. "Do you photograph people without their permission?" she asked one morning while Jake was eating breakfast. "What? No, of course not. That would be incredibly unprofessional," Jake replied, confused. "Why would you even ask that? What about surveillance work? Do you do that type of photography?" Jake nearly choked on his coffee. "Surveillance, Zara. I photograph weddings and family portraits. The most surveillance-like thing I do is candid shots of kids playing at birthday parties." But his explanations didn't seem to satisfy her. Instead, she'd nod like she was filing away his answers for later analysis. It reminded Jake of how police officers took statements, listening carefully, but not necessarily believing what they heard. The breaking point came on Thursday night. Jake had been working late, editing photos from a wedding he'd shot the previous weekend. It was past midnight, and he thought Zara was asleep. The house was quiet except for the soft clicking of his mouse and keyboard as he adjusted colors and cropped images. He was particularly proud of the shots he'd gotten during the ceremony. The lighting had been challenging, dim church with stained glass windows, but his new equipment had handled it perfectly. The photos captured genuine emotion and joy, exactly what wedding photography should be about. Jake was so focused on his work that he didn't hear Zara's footsteps in the hallway. He only noticed her when he sensed someone standing behind him. Turning around, he found her in the doorway of his studio, staring at his computer screen with an expression he'd never seen before. Her face had gone completely white, and her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She was looking at his monitor like she was seeing something terrible, but Jake couldn't understand why. The screen showed a beautiful image of the bride and groom's first dance, surrounded by their smiling family and friends. "What are you doing?" Zara's voice was barely above a whisper, but there was something in her tone that made Jake's skin crawl. It wasn't curiosity or even suspicion anymore. It was accusation. "I'm editing wedding photos," Jake said slowly, unsure why he felt like he needed to defend himself. "This is what I do for work, remember?" Zara stepped closer to the screen, her eyes scanning the image with an intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. "All these people," she said. "You photographed all of them?" "Well, yeah, it's a wedding. It's kind of the point, to capture everyone celebrating together. Without their individual consent, you just ... recorded them all." Jake stared at her. "Zara, they hired me to photograph their wedding. Everyone there knew I was the photographer. That's how weddings work." But she wasn't listening to his explanation. She was studying the screen like she was analyzing intelligence photos than looking at happy celebration pictures. Her finger traced the air near the monitor, pointing at different faces in the crowd. "How many people attend these events typically?" she asked. "I don't know. Depends on the wedding. This one had about 150 guests." "And you have photographs of all of them? Not individual portraits of everyone, but yeah, most people probably appear in at least a few shots throughout the night." Zara's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She stepped backwards so quickly that she bumped into the doorframe. 150 people, she repeated, like Jake had just confessed to something terrible. "Zara, what is wrong with you?" Jake finally snapped. "You're acting like I'm some kind of criminal for doing my job. These are happy photos of people celebrating. Look at them. They're smiling, dancing, having fun. What exactly do you think I'm doing wrong here? She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Jake saw something in her eyes that shocked him. It was fear, but not fear of him specifically.
Yes.
It was like she was afraid of what he represented, what his work meant. In some larger context, he couldn't understand. You collect images of large groups of people, she said slowly, like she was working through a complex problem. You have advanced equipment for surveillance and documentation. You attend social gatherings specifically to record attendees. Okay, stop right there, Jake said, standing up from his chair. I don't collect images like some creepy stalker. I'm a professional photographer. People pay me to document their special events. This isn't surveillance. It's celebration photography. But you could use this equipment for surveillance, Zara pressed. These devices, this technology, it's capable of much more than wedding photography. Jake felt his patience finally snap. So could a kitchen knife be used for more than cooking? But that doesn't make every chef a criminal. Zara, cameras exist to take pictures. It's literally what they're designed for. I don't understand what conspiracy theory you've gotten wrapped up in, but you're being completely irrational. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the small studio space. Jake could see Zara's mind working, processing his words and his obvious frustration. Slowly, some of the fear seemed to leave her face, replaced by confusion and what might have been embarrassment. You're telling me that all of this equipment, all of these activities, are purely for artistic and commercial purposes? She asked. Yes. That's exactly what I've been telling you all week. Jake gestured at his camera setup. Look, I'll show you exactly how everything works if that will help you understand. He picked up his camera and started explaining each function. How the autofocus worked, what the different lenses were for, how the lighting system created flattering portraits. With each demonstration, he watched Zara's expression change from suspicion to fascination to something that looked like relief. The wireless transmitters only control the lights? She asked. Only the lights watch? Jake pressed a button, and one of the softboxes dimmed. Another button made it brighten again. That's it. No secret communication, no surveillance network. Just photography lights that I can adjust remotely so I don't have to run around the room during a shoot. Zara nodded slowly, like she was processing this information and comparing it to something else. And the ring light device creates even lighting for portrait photography. Eliminates harsh shadows on people's faces. Jake demonstrated by turning it on, and the room filled with soft, flattering light. See, it just makes people look good. In photos, for the first time in a week, Zara seemed to relax. Her shoulders dropped, and the tension left her face. But now Jake had questions of his own. Zara, where did you think I got this equipment? And why were you so convinced I was using it for surveillance? She was quiet for a long moment, looking, like she was debating how much to tell him. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. Where I come from, technology like this is used very differently, she said. I made assumptions based on my own experiences, and I was wrong. I'm sorry for doubting you. It wasn't a complete explanation, but it was the most honest thing she'd said since the whole weird situation started. Jake could tell there was more to the story, but at least now he understood that her fears had been genuine, even if they were misplaced. Look, Jake said, I don't know what kind of place you grew up in where photography equipment was used for surveillance, but here, this is just how I make a living. I help people capture happy memories. Zara nodded, but Jake could see her mind still working through something complex. Whatever had triggered her paranoia wasn't completely resolved, but at least now she seemed to understand that he wasn't the threat she'd imagined him to be. After Jake finished demonstrating his equipment, the studio fell into an awkward silence. Zara stood there looking embarrassed and relieved at the same time, while Jake tried to process what had just happened. His roommate had spent a week thinking. He was some kind of spy or surveillance expert, all because of his photography gear. I owe you a real explanation, Zara said quietly, her voice different than he'd ever heard it before. Gone was the formal, precise way she usually spoke. Now she sounded uncertain, almost vulnerable. Jake sat down in his desk chair and gestured for her to take the other chair in the room. I think that would help, yeah, because honestly, Zara, this whole week has been really confusing for me. She sat down slowly, like she was still deciding whether to trust him. For several minutes, she just stared at her hands folded in her lap. Jake could see her internal struggle, wanting to explain but afraid of something. What I'm about to tell. You will sound impossible, she finally said. But after seeing how patient you were with my suspicions, how you took the time to show me everything instead of just getting angry, I think you deserve the truth. Jake leaned forward. Okay, I'm listening. Zara took a deep breath. I'm not from Northern Europe, not from anywhere on Earth. Jake blinked. What do you mean? I mean, I'm from another planet, another world entirely. She looked up at him. Then, watching his face carefully for his reaction, Jake's first instinct was to laugh. But something in her expression stopped him. She wasn't joking or playing some elaborate prank. She was serious, and more than that, she looked scared of how he might react. You're saying you're an alien, Jake said slowly. That's your word for it, yes. I'm part of what you might call a cultural exchange program. My people send researchers to study other civilizations, to learn about how different species develop and organize their societies. Jake stared at her. And you were sent here to study humans? Specifically, to live among humans and observe daily life patterns? To understand how your society functions at the individual level, not just the governmental or technological level. It sounded crazy. It should have sounded completely insane. But as Jake thought back over the past few months, so many things suddenly made sense. Her intense curiosity about everything he did, the way she asked questions about the most basic human activities like she was learning about them for the first time, her formal speech patterns and the way she moved so carefully, like she was consciously thinking about every action. The equipment, Jake said. Why did it scare you so much? Zara's expression grew troubled. Where I come from, device is similar. Your photography equipment are used for population monitoring and surveillance. Ring lights that look almost identical to yours are used to collect biological data from large groups. Wireless transmitters like the ones you have are used for tracking and communication intercepts. So when you saw my studio, I thought I'd discovered that Earth was more technologically advanced than our initial surveys indicated. I thought. You might be part of some secret monitoring program, or worse, that my presence here had been detected and you were gathering intelligence on me. Jake shook his head in amazement. And I just thought you were freaked out by expensive camera gear. I realize now how foolish my assumptions were. Your equipment does look similar to technology from my world, but the function is completely different. You use advanced tools to create art and capture happy moments. You use similar tools for control and surveillance. The weight of what she was telling him was starting to sink in. So you're really not human? Instead of answering with words, Zara stood up and walked to the window. She looked outside for a moment like she was checking too. Make sure no one could see into the room. Then she did something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. Her skin began to change color. What had appeared to be normal, very pale human skin started to shift. It became lighter, almost translucent, with a faint silvery quality that seemed to shimmer in the studio lighting. Her hair, which had been platinum blonde, now appeared almost white, with a subtle, iridescent quality. This is how I actually look, she said, her voice carrying a slight harmonic quality that hadn't been there before. What you've been seeing is a projection, a disguise that helps me blend in with humans. Jake stood up slowly, his mind struggling. To process what he was seeing, that's incredible. Zara held up her hand, and Jake watched as small objects around the room, a pen, a lens cap, his phone began to float slightly off their surfaces. They hovered for just a few seconds before settling back down. We have certain abilities that humans don't possess, she explained. Nothing dramatic, but enough that I have to be very careful not to accidentally reveal myself. Jake sank back into his chair. This is really happening. You're really an alien, and you've been living in my apartment, studying me like a lab rat. Not like a lab rat, Zara said quickly, her skin shifting back to its human appearance. Jake, I want you to understand something. When I first arrived here, humans were just subjects to be observed and documented. But living with you, watching how you live your life, seeing your kindness and creativity, it changed everything for me. She sat back down, leaning forward earnestly. You're not a specimen to be studied. You're You're my friend. The first real friend I've ever had from any species. Jake felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him was still reeling from the revelation that his roommate was from another planet. But another part of him was touched by what she'd said about friendship. Is Zara even your real name? It's close enough to my actual name that I can respond to it naturally. In everything I've told you about enjoying our conversations and appreciating your patience, all of that is completely true.
What about
Your research? Are you still reporting on me to your superiors? Zara looked uncomfortable. I do send regular reports about human social structures and daily life patterns. But Jake, I've never included anything personal about you specifically. I've never reported on your individual habits or behaviors in a way that could identify you. But you could if you wanted to. I could, but I won't. What happens in this apartment? Our friendship? Your trust in me? That's not part of my official research. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, other people were going about their normal human lives, completely unaware that someone from another world was living among them, studying them. How many others are there? He asked. Other people like you, studying humans? I don't know the exact number, but there are others. We're placed in different locations, different social contexts, to get a broad understanding of human civilization. And none of them know that you've told someone the truth? Absolutely not. What I've just done goes against every protocol I was given. If my superiors knew I'd revealed myself to a human, I'd be recalled immediately. Jake turned back to face her. Then why did you tell me? Zara was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft. Because you showed me that humans are capable of understanding and compassion, even when faced with things that don't make sense. You could have gotten angry when I accused you of surveillance. You could have demanded that I move out when I was acting paranoid and suspicious. Instead, you took the time to patiently show me the truth. She paused, then continued. And because keeping this secret from you felt like lying to a friend. After everything you've shared with me about your life, your dreams, your work, it felt wrong to keep pretending I was just another human. Jake found himself smiling despite the overwhelming nature of everything he'd just learned. So what happens now? I don't know, Zara admitted. I've never been in this situation before. There's no protocol for what to do when you tell a human the truth about who you are. Well, Jake said, sitting back down, I guess we figure it out together. For the first time since she'd revealed herself, Zara smiled, a genuine, relieved. A smile that somehow looked the same whether her skin was human-toned or silvery. You're not afraid of me? She asked. Jake thought about it seriously. No, I'm not afraid. Confused, amazed, maybe a little overwhelmed, but not afraid. You're still the same person who's been living here for months, who asks thoughtful questions and keeps the apartment cleaner than I ever did. Finding out you're from another planet doesn't change the fact that you're a good roommate and a good friend. Zara's smile grew wider. Thank you, Jake, for understanding, for not panicking, for still wanting to be friends with someone from another world. Hey, Jake said, grinning back at her. It's not every day you find out you're living with someone from outer space. This is definitely going to make for some interesting conversations. The weeks following Zara's revelation transformed their living situation in ways Jake never could have imagined. What had started as a simple roommate arrangement had become something completely unique. A friendship between two beings from different worlds, learning from each other in ways that benefited both of their species. Jake's photography work took on an entirely new dimension with Zara's help. She had a way of seeing human interactions that was both analytical and deeply perceptive. When Jake showed her photos from recent wedding shoots, she pointed out details he'd never noticed before. Look at this image. She said one evening, studying, a photo from a recent anniversary party. See how the elderly couple in the background is holding hands, but their attention is focused on the young couple dancing. They're remembering their own early years together. The expression on their faces shows both nostalgia and hope. Jake looked at the photo with fresh eyes. He'd captured the moment instinctively. Zara's observation helped him understand why the image felt so emotionally powerful. I never thought about it that way. Human emotional connections are far more complex than our initial research suggested, Zara explained. These celebrations aren't just social rituals. They're ways of reinforcing bonds across generations, of sharing experiences between different stages of life. This new perspective began showing up in Jake's work. His photos became more intentional, more focused on capturing the deeper emotional currents beneath surface events. Clients started commenting on how his recent work felt more meaningful, more emotionally resonant. Jake knew he couldn't explain that his secret was getting advice from someone who studied human behavior from an alien perspective. Meanwhile, Zara's reports to her superiors became richer and more nuanced than anything she'd submitted before. Jake's willingness to explain human customs and motivations gave her insights that pure observation never could have provided. "Why do humans give gifts at celebrations?" she asked one day. "It's about showing care," Jake explained. "When you take time to choose something specifically for someone else, it demonstrates that you've been thinking about them, that you understand what would make them happy. But the objects themselves often have little practical value." That's exactly the point. A gift that someone needs is practical, but a gift that someone wants shows that you care about their happiness, not just their survival. These conversations helped Zara understand that human behavior often operated on emotional rather than purely logical principles. Her reports began describing humans as far more sophisticated beings than her species had initially believed, driven by complex social and emotional needs that created rich, interconnected communities. The photography equipment that had once caused so much misunderstanding became a bridge between their worlds. Jake taught Zara how to use the cameras, and she proved to be a natural photographer. Her alien perspective allowed her to see compositions and moments that Jake missed. Humans move in patterns, she observed during a practice session in the local park. Not just physical patterns, but emotional ones. Watch how people's body language changes when they interact with different age groups, or how their facial expressions shift when they think no one is watching. Jake found himself learning to see his own species through her eyes, things he'd always taken for granted, the way people unconsciously mirrored each other's postures during conversation. When passing on the street became fascinating examples of human, social complexity. Their friendship deepened as they shared more about their respective worlds. Zara described her home planet, a place where efficiency and logic governed most decisions, where individual creativity was less valued than collective productivity. Jake's world of artistic expression, personal dreams, and emotional connections was as foreign to her as her world was to him. "On my world, we don't have celebrations like your weddings," she told him one night. "Partnerships are formed based on genetic compatibility and shared goals. The idea of choosing someone based on emotional connection and then celebrating that choice with music, dancing, and symbolic rituals. It's beautiful in a way we never developed." "What about art?" Jake asked. "Do your people create things just because they're beautiful? Functional beauty? Yes. But art for its own sake. Art that exists purely to express emotion or capture a moment in time, that's something uniquely human. Your photography doesn't serve any survival purpose, but it enriches life in ways that practical achievements can't." Jake realized that Zara's presence was changing him too. Her questions made him think more deeply about why he chose photography. As a career, what drew him to capture certain moments, how his work connected him to other people's lives and emotions. "I never really thought about why I love wedding photography so much," he admitted one day. "But talking to you has made me realize it's because I get to witness and preserve the moments when people are at their happiest, where they're surrounded by everyone they love." "You're documenting human joy," Zara said simply. "That's not just art, it's historical preservation of your species' capacity for happiness." Their living arrangement became more collaborative. Jake helped Zara understand human customs she observed in public, while she helped him see patterns in human behavior that improved his photography. When Jake had trouble with difficult clients, Zara would analyze their behavior and suggest approaches that almost always worked. "The mother of the bride is anxious because she's not in control of the event," Zara observed after Jake described a particularly stressful wedding consultation. "She's not trying to be difficult, she's trying to ensure her daughter's happiness. In the only way she knows how. If you give her small tasks that make her feel involved, she'll become your ally instead of an obstacle." The advice worked perfectly. Jake started seeing his challenging clients as people with understandable motivations rather than just obstacles to overcome. As months passed, both Jake and Zara began to realize that their friendship was creating something unprecedented. Jake was learning to see humanity from an outside perspective, gaining insights that made him a better photographer and a more understanding person. Zara was learning about human nature from an insider's view, developing emotional intelligence that her species had never prioritized. "I think we're both becoming something new," Jake said one evening, as they reviewed photos from a recent family reunion he'd photographed. "You're becoming more human, and I'm becoming more, I don't know what to call it, more aware of what it means to be human." "We're becoming bridges," Zara replied. "I'm learning to value things my people don't understand: creativity, emotional connection, individual expression. You're learning to see your species objectively while still appreciating what makes humans special." Their friendship had evolved beyond simple cultural exchange. They were creating a new kind of understanding between two very different forms of intelligent life, proving that connection and communication could overcome even the most fundamental differences. Jake's work continued to improve, earning him recognition in photography circles that led to better clients and more interesting projects. He knew his secret weapon was having access to the most insightful cultural observer he'd ever met. Zara's mission was extended indefinitely when her superiors recognized the unprecedented quality of her cultural analysis. She suspected they didn't know the real reason for her improved insights, but she was careful to protect Jake's identity in all her reports. Neither of them knew how long their unique situation would last, but both had gained something invaluable. Jake had learned that friendship could transcend any boundary, even the space between worlds. Zara had discovered that some things, loyalty, trust, genuine affection, were universal values that existed wherever intelligent life developed the capacity for connection. Their story had become proof that understanding between different forms of life was possible when built on mutual respect, curiosity, and the willingness to see the world through someone else's eyes. In a universe full of different species and civilizations, they had created something rare and precious, a friendship that bridged the gap between worlds.